go.
known, and that's how they escape. So that's the first time that Pinocchio has to leave. That this is the first scene where he has to
Might play leaked later, but
make a clean break from something
Not sure.
pathological. So tyranny, you see this echoed. You see echoes of this in the story of Moses leading his people from Egypt, because Moses is a master of water, right? He hits a rock with a stick and water comes out of it, and he's floating on water when he's an infant, and he parts the Red Sea, and so he's a master of water and transformation. And the Pharaoh's kingdom is represented as desert stone, roughly speaking. And so the idea there is that, well, the kingdom is solid ground, but it can be a tyranny, and the water is chaos, but it can be the thing that you have to leap into to free yourself from the tyranny. It's not like in the Moses story that comes easy, right? Because the Hebrews leave Israel, or leave Egypt, which is a terrible tyranny, and you think, well, that's good, they've escaped from the tyranny. But that isn't what happens. They escape from the tyranny, they actually end up somewhere arguably worse, because they're wandering around in the desert for 40 years. And it's a brilliant element of that story, because it states clearly that when you go from a bad place to a better place, you go to a worse place first. And it's a great thing to know, because it also tells you why you might be unwilling to take the next step. You know, you're aiming up, but in order to...
Okay, so to put some context, because even myself, I'm like not sure where I was at. Basically, there was this kid that turned into like a mule, and he kind of lost what made him like human. And now he's like talking about like, I don't know, work. Oh, work is good for doing good shit.
Aim up,
I think.
Let go of something you already have. And then that'll put you into a state of chaos. And unless you're willing to undergo that intermediary state of chaos, and you might not recover from it, you're not going to get to the next level. So that's rough. Well, so Pinocchio, he decides that chaos is better than tyranny, and guided by his conscience, jumps.
Can we stop with the self-care week?
He does such meta. How much can you call this science?
And then we don't see anything happening in the water in this particular scene. They come back.
Are we just doing art here? Are we just having like a class about art and somehow based upon like psychology and story, like, you know? Like, how much can you say that that's psychology more than like art?
All half drowned and exhausted by their adventure, and they go back home. And I think maybe we'll take a break now. Let's see, this is a good time to take a break. 1:30. So let's break for 15 minutes, okay? All right.
Oh yeah. How much is that class about map of meaning? Yeah, sure, there's like psychology in that, but like there's a lot of like just, you know, developing a story, like it's art almost. You know, you're making a critique about the art and what you can take out of the meaning out of it, and how you can apply that meaning to like broader human scale of living. You know, like I see where the psychology is, and I also see where the art is. But like, can you really call this science? You know, maybe it's just like it's kind of just searching for certain patterns in history and stories that could apply really well to the human experience that is. You know, there's like something there. But again, it is searching patterns like that. It could be like considered as a science. I'm just trying to think about the methodology behind it. Okay, it's like it's really cool. It's a great framework, and I feel like that's my dog. But yeah. Hello, doggy. Hello. Dog. What do you think about Jordan Peterson photo? What do you think about these? Oh yeah, it's like, okay, you search for patterns, but like at the same time, it's like that's why I'm not sure if it's more about art here, with like, oh, how can we find morals that applies or whatever, and how much is like actual psychology. I don't even know if it calls him it's psychology, like where archetypal mythological themes. I kind of want to see like where did he put his class into, like what What department? Was it in psychology? Was it like in art? Like who? Like at the university? Where was that placed? Anyways.
All right, so Carl Jung talked about this phenomena.
You see, Carl Jung. You know, like, again. It's like there's like a wisdom into like just trying to make stories or something.
And so it's a complicated idea, but basically what it means is that sometimes you take a leap forward and you learn some things, but you can't catalyze a new identity, so you try to go back and hide in your old identity.
And there's a lot of like psychology like burst into it. It's like, oh, you build identity like that, but like afterwards it's like just like all stories patterns of stories applies to our lives, you know, and like how much like in those stories we can see patterns of psychology, kinda, you know. That's what I'm realizing with this class.
Well, things have changed and you've learned something, and that isn't who you are anymore. And so it's like you have to cut parts of yourself off in a destructive manner to fit back into the person that you were. Now what happens here is that Pinocchio escapes from this tyrannical situation and undergoes this descent into chaos, but he tries to go back home. He tries to go back to what he was, and he can't do that anymore. His father isn't at home anymore. And so when he goes home, he finds that there's no home there. Now, this happens to people sometimes, and it's often a shock to them. So one of the things I've noticed about Peter Pan type, I'm going to speak about men here because I've observed it more in men, is that they'll often stay under the thumb of their father. And you think, well, why would someone do that? Because it means they're subject to the tyrannical judgment of their father. They're always concerned about what their father would think or whether their father approves of them, and so forth. And you think, well, that's got to be an unpleasant place to be. Why would you do that? Well, one of the things that I've suggested to my clients and to other people sometimes is that here's a weird little exercise that you can undertake, a little thought experiment. So you have your parents, and of course your parents have friends who are about their age, and maybe some of them are people you only know peripherally. And I might ask you, well, do you care more about what your parents think than you care about what these peripheral people who know your parents think? And then the answer to that is, well, of course. And then the question that arises out of that is, why? I mean, for someone else, your parents are the peripheral people, and their parents are central. Like, why is it logical that your parents' opinion makes any more difference to you than
well, they're more close to you all the time, right? Makes sense. You're with your parents way more than the peripheral friends of your parents.
And fair enough, but that's not the point.
There's also that.
And then another point there is that to the degree that your parents' opinion about you matters more than some randomly selected people of approximately the same age, Jung would say, well, you haven't exactly separated out the God image from your parents, and so you're still under that combination. It's like, it's a complicated thing to talk about, but think about the Harry Potter series. Harry has two sets of parents, right? He's got the Dursley parents, and then he's got these like magical parents that sort of float behind, and he should know the difference between them. They shouldn't be one and the same. They're not for him. And it's like, well, you have your parents and you have nature and culture as parents, and you shouldn't be thinking that your parents are nature and culture as well. They shouldn't have final dominion over you. It means that you're not an individual yet if that's the case. Freud said, for example, that no one could be a man unless his father had died. And Jung said, yes, but that death can take place symbolically. Okay, so there's that part of the idea. And then another part of the idea is, one of the times in your life when you actually realize that you're an individual is when you'll go and ask your parents something and you'll realize they actually don't know any more about what you should do than you do. And that sucks. And that's partly why people are often willing to maintain a tyrant-slave relationship with their father. It's like, on the one hand, you have to be inferior in a relationship like that. You know, you've always got the judge watching you. But on the other hand, there's always someone who knows what to do. There's always someone standing between you and the unknown that you can go ask, what should I do? Well, at some point you'll realize that the reason you can't ask that anymore is because they actually don't know any more than you do. And then that's a pain. Like that is a symbolic death. And that's also when you establish a more individual relationship with your parents. It's at that point that you could conceivably start taking care of them instead of the reverse. And that's a time that should come. But you have to let that image of perfection go. And that exposes you. Well, that's what happens here. You know, Pinocchio goes home and he wants things to be the way they were, and he wants to stay under the careful care of the benevolent father, but that's no longer possible. He's past that point, and that's why the father has disappeared. And so Geppetto has gone off to look for Pinocchio because he also needs his son, but But in any case, the house is abandoned. And so then we see inside the house that everything's covered with cobwebs.
New journey. Now your parents don't have everything. Wow, you're on your own, kid. You know, like this song.
And Pinocchio and
Get it?
Cricket sit on the steps, and they're very concerned.
Get
First
it?
of all, they wonder where he
Offspring?
went, so they're actually concerned
I think
that he's
that's
gone.
it.
But they also
Oh.
don't know what to do because there's just no going home. And so, you know, that's also the case that once you hit a certain point in your development, well, it's the same thing we already talked about. The answers that you're looking for are not going to be found in your parents' house. It's as simple as that. Now, you could artificially maintain your dependency, but, you know, if you do that for too long, things get pretty ugly. So you get pretty stale, and you know, you're like bread that's been on the shelf for too long. So now they're wondering what to do and where he could be. And then something very strange happens. The star shows up again, and it turns into a dove, and the dove flies down and puts a piece of paper bathed in light with gold writing on it in front of the cricket and the puppet. So what in the world's going on there? Well, we know what the star is. We've seen it multiple times, right? It's also the place that the Blue Fairy came from. But it's this transcendent place. It's this place that occurs sort of as the ultimate ideal. And this time it delivers a message. So what's happening here is that Pinocchio is fundamentally oriented by the wish that his father made so long ago, right? And the wish was that he would become a fully functioning individual. And so that's that transcendent place. And Jung would say, when you orient your vision, different things appear to you in the world. So, and I mean this literally. So, because you can't see everything,
Like, what's on the exam here?
what's necessary, your brain calculates what's necessary for you to see so that you get to the point that you're aiming at. And I don't mean that metaphorically, I mean it literally. Things that aren't relevant to what you're seeking, you won't see them.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Away, and they have to really block your pathway before they'll be literally visible. So you orient yourself towards something, and that makes some things visible that wouldn't be visible, and makes other things invisible that you might have seen. And so when you change your orientation, what manifests itself in the world also changes. Now, Pinocchio
Makes
is
sense.
in despair here.
You see where you want to go,
Where
and
could
you
my
see what
father
you
have
need.
gone? And so the question is, what exactly is he asking under those circumstances? And what he's asking is something like, I had a structure that was orienting me properly in relationship to the world. And as far as it was embodied in my actual father, it's now gone. Is there any possibility?
Okay, so it's like you need like some kind of like vision to see the world. You know, you need a set of glasses to orient yourself. If before you kind of took like the one of your parents, it's like after a while that one doesn't really work, and you need to find a second pair of glasses that's more prone to you and your goals and like the ideal self you really want to
And that
be.
is what you want. You see,
know?
if you're in a chaotic circumstance, maybe you've escaped, let's say, from a bad relationship or something like that, and you're out of it, but now you don't know what to do. What you're hoping is that you can get your life back together, right? That you can put the pieces that have fallen apart back together. And so you're automatically...
I wish I had like a iPad or something to write notes at the same time. That could be cool. You know, you watch a class, I do notes at the same time, like a real class, you know. But like at the same time, there's no PowerPoint, and Paint is just like too like, yeah.
fantasy about producing another, let's call it stable state. You're going to be looking for the spirit that would enable that stable state to be generated. Because really what it is, in some sense, is your new personality. You're in chaos, you have to become something new in order to get out of chaos. And so you're hoping for that.
And the way to get rid of the glasses of your parents is chaos. Is there's like going to be like some kind of like weird everywhere until you're able to get out of the chaos with their new pair of glasses. Yeah.
You'll see it.
Yeah, that's like, yeah.
That's going to make certain things visible to you. That's the proper way of thinking about it.
Hey, and you
know,
see
when
the world
you're curious
differently
about
now.
something, and maybe you're curious about something and you walk into a bookstore, that curiosity is going to guide you to a certain set of books. The fact that you have the question in mind is going to open your eyes to certain kinds of possibilities. And so if your goal is to reestablish your union with the positive father, let's say, then certain things are going to appear and other things aren't. And that's really what this represents.
Yeah, it's just like, depending of your goal, the road to it is going to be different. Basically, that's it. If I go to the red flag, the steps I'm going to make and the tools I'm going to need to get to the red flag is not going to be the same as the steps and the tools I would need to use as the red flag. You know, the another color flag. And the same thing applies, you know, you're not going to search for the same information to get to the place you want to be, like if you compare to the place you kind of wanted to be beforehand, when that place was like something about like what your parents were telling you about. Make sense?
The transcendent stars.
That's just the path to adulthood, basically. That's why like Pinocchio makes sense with it.
The goal, which is this developmental process. It's capable of, let's say, delivering a message to you. In some sense, that's what's happening when you're thinking, you know, because you have a problem.
That's kind of an analogy for like heroin addictions. So you know, as the star is like really bright, and that's like the only thing you see in the sky. The only thing you know what I mean is like in your head when there's only one pulsion is to take the addiction.
You have somewhere you want to go.
That's my analogy. I think Pinocchio is about addiction of drugs, and every path towards the end of the movie is a thing like that.
Information reveals itself to you in the interior landscape.
You know, it's like kind of doing like tarot card. You know what I mean? Tarot card. That's what it reminds me. Tarot cards. You know, I'm not going to say if it's bad or good. You know, it's like someone's going to put some cards on the ground, like 3 cards, and you're going to make a story out of it that makes sense to you. And I feel he's doing kind of like a similar thing, and I love this shit. I'm not saying it's false or not. I'm just saying that there's a thing about making a structure out of these little cards that's actually kind of like it feels, it makes you see the yourself or the world through a different lens you wouldn't have seen before. You know, I feel like he's doing the same, but with psychology, which is kind of funny. Again, it's like my interpretation. That's why it's like I'm not sure if he's doing art with psychology or it's like more psychology, and I'm really like curious about where did that class like was into. Was it like into what department?
You know, in some sense, it feels as if you're producing the thoughts, but it could equally be said that you're watching the thoughts reveal themselves. And which of those is the more accurate description is by no means obvious. You can certainly have thoughts that surprise you, which is very strange. It's like they're your thoughts. How in the world can they surprise you? But they do. So it's like you didn't know them before you thought them up. And then the question is, well, where did they come from if you didn't know them before you thought them up? They sort of spring out of the void. That's one way of thinking about it. Anyways.
Yeah, where are they from? Oh! Where are they from, Peterson? Where the void of thoughts comes from?
Is there any possibility that
wait, where was I?
Find that again?
Where was I?
And that is what you want. You see, like if you're in a chaotic circumstance, maybe you've escaped, let's say, from a bad relationship or something like that, and you're out of it, but now you don't know what to do.
Where was I?
What you're hoping is that you can get your life back together.
Right, we talked about that.
Pieces that are ridiculous. You always, you can lay out a strategy and pursue it successfully.
And
maybe the strategy is actually oriented towards something good, something that will.
Okay, he's still talking about like your path to your objective.
You can go into the chaos, and you can pull something out of it that's truly of value, and you can incorporate that in your own personality, and that makes you much, much stronger, like literally stronger. Not, well, that's also what you're doing. That's what you should be doing, in principle, when you're going to university. We leap right over that.
Wait,
and so
where was I?
That's going
it's because I was bad fate. I was having bad fate now, and I'm stuck here. Okay, that's why.
You get curious about something, and you walk into a bookstore.
Okay, the bookstore. Yeah, we talk about the bookstore and the motivation.
And that's really what this represents.
Okay, let's see.
The transcendent star is the goal, which is the
transcendental. Okay. For him, the transcendental star is like the goal. It's like my addiction of heroin.
You know, in some sense, it feels as if you're producing the thoughts, but it could equally be said that you're watching the thoughts reveal themselves. And which of those is the more accurate description is by no means obvious. You can certainly have thoughts that surprise you, which is very strange. It's like they're your thoughts. How in the world can they surprise you? But they do. So it's like you didn't know them before you thought them up.
Oh, okay. He's saying that those. I'm not sure, but like, imagine those kind of thoughts that just appear out of nowhere. It's because you never add the use of it. But now that you're oriented in a certain way, it's like the first time you kind of like make them out. That's what surprises you, because like you never like had the opportunity to make them a thing. But because now you have a new angle, it's like either kind of like, whoop, oh no, it's useful to build a thoughts like that, which is kind of cool. What do you think about it? It's like Yeah, yeah, but it makes sense. Your thoughts are not going to be the same depending on what goal you're going to orient yourself to. You know,
up. And then the
makes
question is, where
sense.
did they come from if you didn't know them before you thought them up? They sort of spring out of the void.
Yeah, well, they're spreading out the void correlation, and depending on the goal you're setting yourself in. If you're setting yourself to the transcendental star, maybe you're going to have certain thoughts that are going to appear like weirdly because the combination of things are only going to be the same if you orient yourself to that goal. You know? I think. I don't know.
That's one way of thinking about it. Anyways,
Yeah.
this
The
is a Holy
void.
Ghost symbol, this dove as well. So that puts some Christian imagery in here again. You can think of it as a manifestation of the spirit of transformation. That's another way of looking at it. Anyways, it's the conscience that interprets the letter. So it's sort of figuring out what the next thing should be. And weirdly enough, what the letter says is that Geppetto was out looking for Pinocchio and he got swallowed by a whale, which makes very little sense, to put it bluntly. Geppetto went to search for Pinocchio, and now he's at the bottom of the sea in a giant whale. And we leap right over that tremendous gap in logic and follow the story nonetheless. Okay, so what's the idea here? The idea is that if you fall into a chaotic state and everything falls apart, there's the possibility that things can come back together, including what you've just learned, in a new state. And so you can conceptualize that symbolically as the existence of the dead father at the bottom of the chaotic landscape. That's the proper way, as far as I can tell, to think about it.
Okay,
There's
well-
something down there that's capable of reforming and reemerging that incorporates the previous state, but that takes it farther. And you're not going to find that unless you descend into this chaotic place where it feels like all order is gone. While you generate order, it's going to be akin to the order that you had before, but there's going to be something new about it as well. So it's down to the bottom of the chaotic state to bring up what you're missing. And that's one level of analysis. Another level of analysis you think is, well, that's also what you're doing. That's what you should be doing in principle when you're going to university. You know, you come to university in roughly the same state as Pinocchio. You know, you're a bit of a puppet and you're kind of a jackass, and what the hell do you know? And it's chaotic because you haven't found your place in the world properly. And I don't mean merely for career, not that that's not relevant, because it is, but it's more important than that. It's because you're a historical creature, because you are a product of history. Unless you are enculturated properly, which means you understand your past in the sense that the humanities can allow for that, then you haven't been able to incorporate the wisdom of your ancestors into your day-to-day pursuits, and that's going to make you weak. That's the idea anyways. And so when you come to university, this is what university is for. It's so that you can go into the chaos and you can pull something out of it that's truly of value, and you can incorporate that in your own personality, and that makes you much, much stronger, like literally stronger, not more educated. But it's not like you know more facts. It's that you literally are a better person, and better means
Oh,
you can do far more things.
that's an interesting way to see like building yourself too. It's like to build yourself, you need to go where you can build stuff, and where can you build stuff out of chaos? Like if it's all orderly, you can't really do something. It's all organized itself. You need to go into chaos because otherwise it's already organized. You cannot use it. Well, you can destroy it. You can destroy organized thing to make chaos out of it and make other new stuff out of it. But and I think he said I don't know where the father figure comes in. You know, it's like go back to the father figure, but there's in some way there's still wisdom into that father figure that you need to go back to or something. I don't know.
You can articulate that's something that's of crucial importance, is that you can articulate yourself properly, which is more useful than anything else you could possibly manage. Like if you guys come out of university capable of making coherent arguments and using language properly, you're so powerful that it's ridiculous. You can lay out a strategy and pursue it successfully, and maybe the strategy is actually oriented towards something good, something that will actually work for you and work for other people as well.
And he's saying that whole thing of like trying to build yourself is going to make you better at trying to orient yourself towards the goal you want. And the way you build those is through like you said, humanities, your history, where you're coming from, what makes you, kind of. Which is like, yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And I don't really understand why people
Cool.
are told this when they come to university, is that your goal is to make yourself as articulate in writing and thinking and speaking as you possibly can, because that opens the door to everything that you'll want to do in the future, no matter what it is. The more articulate person always rises, always. Because they lay out strategies more effectively. They lay out the reasons for doing something or for not doing something more particularly. They convince people, and properly so, that they can grapple with potentials that lies ahead effectively. and they can defend themselves when they're...
Yeah, you get like even more resistance out of it. You get stronger, more resistance. You're better at communicating too, I guess.
challenged. And so all of that is going into the past, into the chaos of the past, you could even say, and pulling up the spirit that inhabits that from the bottom and uniting with it. And if you don't do that, well,
It's like you need to build something out of chaos to make yourself something. You cannot really build yourself from something that's too orderly, I guess. You know, I go back to it. There's like something about like you building yourself, and like there's something about building something out of chaos order than from order. You know, that's my thing. I don't know if the order thing makes sense. It's like the order thing was kind of your father, the ideal of their father. But the thing is, you don't want that because it's not enough for you in your own circumstance. That's why you need to search for the chaos to either add to it or like I don't know what, destroy the ideal order of your father to build something out of it and get stronger because you're more like
you're defenseless in the
better
case
to
of
orient yourself
the tragedy of life.
out of that structure you're going to
And
build.
then that's not so good, because if you're defenseless in the face of the tragedy of life, then you get way more hurt than you would otherwise get, and so do the people around you. And then the probability that you're going to be resentful and bitter about that is really high, because no one likes to fail continually. And then you get bitter and
I like to
resentful.
fail.
And
No,
then
that's-
resentful. Well, being vengeful and mean is the next step. It doesn't take much of a transformation to move you from that
Yeah, because anger going to bring that. Okay, I
to the
see.
next. So now Pinocchio has to
Then League of Legends comes in, the real transcendental need of everyone in League of Legends.
face the thing that he's afraid of most, and that's a complicated idea as well. So Jung had this phrase that he liked, that he took from the alchemists, which was in sterquilinis invenitur, and what it meant was, what you most want to find will be found where you least want to look. There's this old story, it's from King Arthur, and King Arthur has these knights, right? They all sit around the round table, which means they're roughly equal. That's what the round
You don't want to look at the chaos. It doesn't make
It's
sense.
the most valuable object. That's what it means.
You know, we go back to the chaos thing he uses. I like that concept. You know, you don't want to look at chaos because chaos makes no sense. It's like it's in some way it's like dirty for your mind. Your mind like when it's orderly. If you don't look at it, it's going to make you uncomfortable. But at the same time, that's where the gold is, even if it's chaos
Find
and
the most valuable
uncomfortable.
thing, but they don't know what it is and they don't know where it is. But they know that there's a most valuable thing. So in some sense, it's akin to them orienting themselves by the star. And they don't know where to look. And so what they decide is, they have the castle, it's in the middle of a forest. And so each knight decides to start looking for the Holy Grail by entering the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And so what's the idea there? Well, imagine there are things that come easy to you and that you're fond of pursuing and that you're happy about pursuing. So you've found those and pursued them and you've mastered them. So you know all that, but then there's another place that you don't want to go. And so you haven't gone there and you haven't mastered it, and you're very small in comparison to it because you haven't mastered it. And so it has this monstrous aspect. But it has, if what you're doing isn't working, it's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so I can give you another example of this. So let's say that you're an agreeable person. And so you don't like conflict and you won't stand up for yourself, and you regard anger and the proclivity to provoke and to engage in conflict as something that's positively terrible. It's not only that you're not good at it, it's actually that it's wrong. So that's where you have to go if you're going to learn how to stand up for yourself. And imagine that you're afraid. Maybe you have something like agoraphobia.
Learn the reverse. You want to beat. Okay. You know, he likes the Bible shit. There's no. Ain't there a thing about war? You need to learn your enemy as it is your friend, and that's how you'll defeat your enemy. I think that you can apply the same thing. If you want to defeat what makes you scared and get stronger, you need to learn how to befriend what scares you. And it goes back to like, okay, why does befriending your enemy is the best way to defeat the enemy? It goes back to like that thing. That's scary. It's like the worst thing ever, but you're going to learn it. It's going, you know?
Phobia. So there's a whole bunch of things that you're afraid of, and you don't want to go there.
Oh, like the
But if you
phobia
put yourself
too.
together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. And that idea is echoed in the prominent stories of dragons and gold. It's exactly the same idea, is that the dragon is this terrible thing. It's this terrible predatory thing that lives forever and is very, very wise.
And it's kind of cool that a lot of stories, I don't know if it was mainly, and that's where it goes with back to like analyzing art, but like there's a lot of stories that use that structure, that patterns of like, that pattern of stories, which is cool.
It lives underground, and it'll kill you. It'll burn you up in a second. But it hoards gold. And so you have to go there into the dragon's lair if you're going to get the gold. And that's a representation of people's paradoxical relationship with reality. It's like you have to go out there and confront it in order to incorporate what it has to offer to you. But the probability that that's going to be intensely dangerous and push you right to the limit, first of all, those are actually the same thing. If it didn't push you to the limit, you wouldn't gain anything valuable from it. So you don't get one without the other. You don't get the gold without the dragon. That's a very strange, very, very strange idea. But it seems to be accurate. So all of that's lurking underneath this, in this imagery of the whale, the thing that's at the bottom of. Now, the whale, you can think of the story of Jonah. What happens with Jonah is that, roughly speaking, he's a prophet, and God tells him that he has to, if I remember correctly, God tells him that he has to go to this city and straighten it out because it's veered off the path and it's heading towards doom. And Jonah thinks, I'm not going to that city to tell those people anything like that because they're not going to be very happy with me just showing up there and telling them, you know, everything they're doing wrong. And so he hops on a boat and tries to get out of there. And then God conjures up this huge storm, and the boat is about to be swamped. And the sailors, they're worried, I think, about making the boat lighter, something like that. They all draw lots to see who gets tossed overboard. And Jonah admits that it's actually his fault because God's upset with him because he got this direct command to go straighten out the city, and he ran off. And so the sailors they're not happy about this, but they throw Jonah overboard, and the sea's calm, and a great fish comes up, a whale, and swallows him. And then he's down in the fish for 3 days, and it throws him up on the dry land, and then he's learned his lesson by that time, and he goes off to pursue his proper destiny. So that's echoed in this story as well, that if you don't follow the pathway that you're supposed to follow, that the seas will become stormy for you, and something will come up and pull you down, and you'll be in a terrible place for some length of time until you learn your lesson. And if you're lucky, you'll get spit back up on shore, and then you can go do what you should do. Well, I mean, that's not a lesson that anybody needs to have interpreted. I think everybody understands that. Anyways.
Well, yeah, if you're not doing the right thing, you're kind of like in a mistake. That's just mistakes. You know, mistakes are going to make you like learn. You know, and why do mistakes make you learn? Because they suck, and you remember them. But that's how afterwards you don't make mistakes. You need the best way. You know, it goes back to like the best way to learn is out of errors, not out of doing right. You know, there's something about doing errors that's going to make you like learn, not the reverse. Anyways,
the cricket tells Pinocchio what he has to do, and then something kind of paradoxical happens. Pinocchio decides he's going to go do this, and then the cricket has got this weird paradoxical response to that. On the one hand, he's sort of pulling Pinocchio back, saying, "Look, you know, this is foolhardy. You're going to go all the way down to the ocean. You're going to confront this terrible whale. This is really, really dangerous." But at the same time, when Pinocchio's on the edge of the cliff, the cricket helps him tie his tail around a rock, and he holds his finger in place so that Pinocchio can tie the knot. It's like the conscience is conflicted about this. It's really dangerous and foolhardy, but it's also necessary. And so he plays this dual role. But Pinocchio's leading at this point, so into the ocean he goes. I guess partly what this means is that if you're not oriented,
that's bubble sounds.
You should take your doubts and the chaos that you're enveloped in seriously. You should face it and think it through. You should go into it as far as you can go into it, because maybe you'll find something at the bottom of it. I mean, the alternative is to pretend that it doesn't exist. So then,
well, yeah, it's just coping. If you're scared, that's one of the way you're going to like not be scared by just like not seeing it purposely or not.
Water. He can breathe down there. It turns out. So you could think that he's gone into the unknown. He's outside of dry land. He's in the unconscious. All of those things are true. And you might think, well, why would it be the world outside of what's known and the unconscious at the same time? This weird intermingling of those two things. And as far as I can tell, that's because when you're in chaos and you don't know what's going on, then you start imagining what might be going on. And that imagination is partly the world, as it might be, but it's also partly the structure of your unconscious mind, which is producing the fantasies. And so when you're truly in chaos, then the distinction between your fantasies and reality isn't clear. That's actually part of what constitutes the chaos. So imagine this. So you're in a relationship and the person betrays you. And you knew who they were, or at least you thought you did, before that moment.
Basically, it's like you're in place in life that you just don't have the knowledge to understand what's happening. So the only thing you can use is the thing you already know, and that's how your fantasies kind of like maps into like what you're trying to see, which is cool. You know, it's like, yeah. I understand. It's like you're just in a part of life that's like so new or so out there, so chaotic, that you cannot really make a pattern of it. You cannot make order of it. So the only thing you can use is what you have inside of you, and you're unconscious, like you said. And that's where, like you said, the information like kind of matches, but like it's not, chaos. I think it makes sense.
You're looking at them,
and
you don't know who they are, and you don't know what the past was, and you don't know what the
I
present.
don't know. I know it's a clinician. How much can you use those things, that idea of chaos and like putting your fantasies open the world, can be used to explain some psychopathologies, you know? It's like, how much can you say that people that have psychotic breaks and stuff like that, or even in some point, like, why do drugs makes the things they do to the mind? be kind of taking source into that thing. That thing of not knowing what's happening outside of you, so the only thing you can do is fantasize. But that fantasize can like kind of slip a bit too much and get you like psychotic or like I don't know what. How much can you use that process, you know, to explain like some psychopathologies, which is really also really interesting. But like I don't know if I don't know.
And you don't know what the future is going to be. All of that's been thrown up into the air in a major way. That's traumatic. So much has fallen apart that it's traumatic. So what do you start to do? You start to imagine what might be the situation. Well, then the reality is your imagination and the reality at the same time. They're not pulled apart at all. You cannot distinguish between them.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why I'm saying like if you're gonna distinguish between yourself and reality, that's where the psychotic paranoia and all that stuff can like kind of slip through, right? You're not sure like what's real or not.
So,
Which
the
is
Jungian idea, I could say that's the snitch that Harry Potter's chasing, by the way. I know that's a terrible leap, but that is what it is. It's that weird intermingling of potential and reality that can manifest itself as the world if you pursue it. It's roughly that. So Pinocchio is in this situation that's half fantasy and half reality in this chaotic state, and he has to go down to find the thing that he least wants to find. And he's hoping that he's got this intuition that in facing that thing, that chaos, that life really is, that chaos, that he's going to find his father and reunite with him.
there's just something like you said, like you need to fight what your father was because to find yourself. But at the same time, you need to go back and reconcile with it. There's like this idea. I don't know why I think about it. I'm seeing like he's doing that a lot. You need you need yourself, but at the same time you need to go back and reconciliate with what it was because there's still something probably that's going to help you.
So you could also say that in some sense it's a decision of faith.
Because maybe it's like your father is that enemy, you know, that enemy you need to like understand or I don't know what to build yourself even more strongly. Maybe. I don't know.
I suppose, because you might ask yourself, well, why bother confronting chaos? If chaos is the ultimate reality, then what the hell use is there in facing it? Because it's just going to reveal itself as the ultimate reality and drown you. But the myths always say the same thing. They say, no, if you confront what's really disturbing you, if you really confront it, you do it voluntarily, you're going to find order in it eventually. Or at least that's the only way you're going to find order. Now, it's not like these stories are optimistic, and it's not as if they give you a sure guide to success.
And order brills you.
It's not like they're unerringly accurate, because you can be subsumed by chaos that's so total that even if you face it, you're not going to prevail. I mean, that's why people die. That's one way of looking at it anyways. But the mythology basically says this is your best bet. If there's a process that's going to work, this.
And again, that's interesting that mythologies and stuff like that use those pattern of stories, and those pattern of stories kind of represents in some way the way people do existence and like, you know, build themselves. It's kind of.
And then you might think, well, the better you do it, the better the chances are of success, or the more consistently you do it, the better the chances of success are. And I think that that's a perfectly reasonable way of looking at it. Okay, so anyways, Pinocchio's down at the bottom of the ocean, and every time he says he's trying to find out where Monstro is, and they ask questions to the fish that are down there, but every time they mention Monstro's name, all the fish disappear. And it's like Voldemort, right? He's the guy whose name you cannot say. And Monstro is precisely that. It's the thing that frightens everyone. And so asking questions down there isn't helping very much. And so Pinocchio, what he does is he's calling for his father, and he keeps going deeper and deeper into the depths. And we're in a scene, there's a scene where the darkness of the ocean turns into an even more profound darkness, and that's what Pinocchio disappears into. And then we see Monstro. He's in this sort of foggy representation, this huge thing that lies very much at the bottom. And there's no life or anything around him, except I think these are mackerel, but maybe they're tuna. They're animated anyway, so it doesn't matter. But there's no life down there. He's so far down at the bottom of the ocean that there's nothing that's alive down there. So, and then we go inside the whale, which is of course absurd, and we see that the whale has eaten a boat at some point in the past. This is one whopping whale. And Geppetto is sitting with the kitten, of all things. He's also got that little goldfish bowl full of goldfish with him too, which is quite the feat. Anyways, he's sitting there, and he knows that he's trapped in the belly of the whale too, and that he can't get out. And so that's an interesting issue. It's because not only is Pinocchio lacking his father, which isn't a good thing, but the father is lacking the son. And there's some indication that the father can't get out of the whale without the son. And so it's like the possibility for order is down there in this chaotic state, but unless there's an active agent to go seek it out, it can't pull itself. It's not animated enough to get out by itself. You know, and you could say, well, there's wisdom in the libraries, but it's not going to, like, without you going in there and gathering it and embodying it, all it does is sit there in potential, in all of that implicit form. That's a good way of thinking about it. So anyways, Geppetto is feeling pretty hopeless because he can't figure out any way of getting out of the whale, and he's also starving. He's starving in the belly of the whale. And here's a way of thinking about that. Geppetto's a good guy, but he's old. And that means his way of doing things is no longer fruitful. That's why he's starving. And it's especially not fruitful because he's missing his son. He's missing the active element that the child represents, say the playful and transformative element that the child represents. And so if you get stuck doing something the same old way, at some point it's no longer going to work. Even if it was good at some point, it has to be updated. And it's updated by, let's call it the spirit of youth or the spirit of attention or the spirit of play, something like that. The willingness to break boundaries and take risks. And Geppetto is very, very skilled, but he doesn't have that. And that's symbolized by the loss of his son. That's why he was out looking for his son too. He needs him. And so they're in despair down there, trying to fish and not getting anything. And so Monster wakes up.
You need to always update your strategy, and somehow Geppetto is like the proof of not updating your strategies over life, I guess. Even if like having a son for some reason makes the strategy refreshed. I don't know.
Mackerel happens to swim by and Monster wakes up, and so then he starts. I think they're tuna actually.
The fact that the mackerel kind of woke up the beast means a lot of things. That the small animals can do so much to a big guy, even if they're so.
They look like tuna to me, and so Monster wakes up.
They look dumb.
His mouth and a bunch of water starts.
That's what they are. They look dumb.
And then you see Pinocchio with the fish. Now, there's very intense implicit Christian symbolism in this part of the film, and I'm going to lay it out point by point. So you may remember, and perhaps you don't know, that one of the symbols for Christ is a fish, ichthys, right? And that's a play on the Greek representation of Christ's name. But there's more to it than that, because all of
Christ waking up the monster.
He performs miracles with fish, and fish are strange things because, well, you can pull them up out of the depths. That's part of it. And so there are things that can be pulled out of the depth, and you could say that it's going to be very difficult for me to take this apart, but you could say in some sense that Christ is a meta-fish. A fish is something that you can dine on, but a way of being is something that provides you with something to dine on a continual basis. And so you might say, well, is it better to have a fish or to be a fisherman? That's another way of thinking about it. And obviously it's better to be a fisherman because then you can get more fish. And so it's one thing to have something, but it's another thing completely to know how to generate good things. And so if you had any sense, you'd take the latter over the former, even though the former is more instantaneously gratifying and requires less work and responsibility. And so anyways, the whale opens his mouth and goes chasing these fish. And Pinocchio he's trying to get the hell out of there, even though he wants to find the whale. When he actually sees the whale, he leaves. And that's also a very common mythological, what would you call it? Plot element. It's very frequently that what happens when the hero first sees the terrible thing, the dragon say, the terrible thing that he's come to conquer, he like freezes and gets the hell out of there because it's far worse than he thought it was going to be. And so Pinocchio, it's like, no way, man, I'm not going near that whale.
No way, man. Not doing it, bro.
So
too strong.
Monster has opened his mouth and the fish are pouring in, and Geppetto is fishing like mad, and he's catching fish like crazy. And so the little cat Geppetto is flinging the fish backwards into this like box, and the little cat is there whacking them to kill them while they're flopping around. And so they're pretty excited about this because they have a problem. The problem is how to get out of the whale. That's the actual problem. But a nested problem inside that is how not to starve to death. And so Geppetto is pretty happy that even though he's not getting out of the whale, that he gets to have something to eat. So you could say as well that he's not exactly focused on the right thing. He's focused on the micro problem instead of the macro problem, and that makes him kind of blind. So anyways, the whale swallows up Pinocchio.
How much do the micro problem is going to help with the macro? How much is if you do the micro problems, it can help with the macro? But I understand what he's saying.
And then he snags Pinocchio. Now this is cool because, and this is another example of that meta fish idea. It's like Geppetto's actually looking not for a fish. He's looking for a way out of the damn whale. And then he catches a bunch of fish and he's like focused on that like mad. And then he catches Pinocchio. And Pinocchio represents what would get him out of the whale, but he's so bloody obsessed with the fish that he doesn't even notice. So he catches Pinocchio and flings him into the fish basket. And so it signifies the blindness of Geppetto's orientation when he's inside the whale. And that's kind of a comment on his aged and insufficient nature. He's solving the problem very well, but it's the wrong problem. So anyways, he fires Pinocchio into the fish. And Pinocchio says, "Father, I'm here." And Geppetto says, "Don't bother me."
You need to also see where the problem is. It's just the strategy to get to the flag. You need to be able to know what flag you need to go. You know, Geppetto is seeing the flag of fishes when he should like be seeing how to get out. He's focusing on the wrong flag, even if he's doing one of the flag really greatly.
Right now, Pinocchio.
Fair enough.
Fishing. So, well, then that's fine. So then he kind of wakes up. He has this little moment of insight, this little revelation that, well, he's caught Pinocchio, so who cares about the damn fish? So then he runs over to the fish box to grab Pinocchio, and instead he grabs a fish and gives it a kiss. And so it's another way of hammering home the fact that there's this confusion.
Lovely fish.
He's suffering from. He can't distinguish the local truth.
I think Geppetto is just having dementia.
And so anyways,
he's getting old.
He tosses the fish aside and he grabs Pinocchio, and they're all thrilled to death to see each other, and so they're united. So Pinocchio has found his father, but they're still trapped in the belly of the whale. Now, Pinocchio takes off his hat, he gets covered with the blanket, he takes off his hat, and he reveals his jackass ears. And so he's found his father, but he's damaged and not Pinocchio. He's damaged and not in good shape. He isn't becoming what he was supposed to be. In fact, he's actually degenerated since Geppetto saw him last. And so he becomes embarrassed, and he says he has a tail. He says, that's nothing, I have a tail too, and then he spins that around kind of laughing, then he brays and gets really embarrassed. And so that's what you see here. He looks like, well, he's revealed himself as a jackass to his father. But you know, that's actually a good thing,
Loser.
because he is a jackass. And if he was unwilling to admit his insufficiency, he wouldn't have ever gone on this pursuit.
Oh, I
So-
see.
It's this perverse willingness to note that he isn't all that he could be, that's part of what drives him to find everything that his father represents. So it's an admission of, it's a humility, and it's an admission of insufficiency. And you need that before you're going to learn anything, because before you learn anything, you have to admit that there are things that are important that you don't know, and that you're a fool, and maybe that you're a brain jackass. And so
Yeah, you need if you think you already know everything, it's like your bank is filled. It's like no, it's fine. My bank is filled. But if you acknowledge that there's like still space and there's still a lot of stuff you don't know, it's like it gives you the place to put stuff in. In the same way, if you want to work upon yourself, you need to let yourself find where you can add stuff to. You know. And it comes from acknowledging you're a jackass or a fucking dumbass or an asshole, you know?
in many religious writings that portray humility positively as the antidote to arrogance. That's the right way of thinking about it. Is that humility means I still have something to learn. I still have something to learn. I'm insufficient. I still have something to learn. It's exactly the opposite, say, of Lampwick's attitude. Anyways, Geppetto decides that a son puppet who's half jackass is better than no son at all, which is another indication of his relatively positive orientation towards the world, and they reunite. And then Pinocchio immediately sets his eyes on the main problem. It's like, hey, we're stuck in this whale. We need to get out of here. And it turns out that Geppetto's already built a raft, but there's a problem. And the problem is that, as Geppetto says, Pinocchio says, well, we'll wait for his mouth to open. And Geppetto says that doesn't work, because when he opens his mouth, Monstro opens his mouth, everything comes in and nothing goes out. So raft, fine, but there's no way of using it. And so Geppetto decides that they're not going to bother with that problem, and they're going to go have some fish.
Hey,
Pinocchio,
eat.
his eye is still on the main prize. He thinks, no way, man, we're getting out of this whale. That's the fundamental thing. We're not going to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. We're going to attend to the fact that it's sinking. We're going to keep our eye on the primary problem. So he's a little more awake by now. So Pinocchio says, we'll make a fire. Now that's cool, I think, because he's down in chaos where his father is trapped, and the first thing he does is to use fire. And of course, that's exactly what people do, right? Because we're fire users. And so this, and shaman, for example, are masters of fire. But there's this really primordial element to the story right here, and it's an indication that
Why
the
shamans?
thing that can transform order into chaos into productive order is also the same spirit that mastered fire. And so Pinocchio lays that out, and he says, we're going to build a fire. And
Okay.
Geppetto says,
Chaos
"Fill
is
him up with
fire."
smoke." And Geppetto says, great, smoked fish. So he's still stuck on this whole fish thing. And so Pinocchio runs around gathering up all the spare wood on the boat, including the furniture, which he starts to break. And Geppetto says, well, what are we going to sit on, while we eat our smoked fish? And Pinocchio basically says, lightly, enough with the damn fish thing. I'm going to fill the whale with smoke, and that's going to make him sneeze, and then we can get the hell out of here. And Geppetto says, that's going to make him mad. It's not a good idea. And, well, I would say that that's the stance of the benevolent state against innovation. Even if the innovation is positive, and even if it's transformative and freeing, the old state, even if it's good, is going to stand in opposition to that. And so that's also something that's very useful to know, because otherwise you can get bitter about that. Anyways, Pinocchio makes this big fire. Geppetto's pretty worried about it, and he starts to fill the whale.
But what if they kill
So this is where
themselves?
the whale turns into a fire-breathing dragon, which is quite cool.
Like, what's the risk here?
Maleficent turns into a fire-spewing dragon as well. And if you watch The Little Mermaid, what's her name, Ursula, she turns into a gigantic snake-like creature as well, although she doesn't exactly spew fire. But the transformation of the ultimate monster into something like a dragon is very, very common, because it's the ultimate symbol of the unknown for a variety of reasons that we'll discuss later. So anyways, yes, it's a symbol of chaos. Anyways, and this is
What?
a horrifying scene. When my son he watched Pinocchio when he was about 4, and he watched this scene over and over and over and over. I don't know how many times he watched that movie, but it must have been 100 times. But he was really
Peter Pan was
fascinated
bitter.
by this scene. And,
Peter
he
Pan was
locked
bitter.
onto it. It was frightening, but there was something in it that he was processing and cottoning onto. So anyways, you see the whale is starting to prepare to sneeze, and it's belching out huge quantities of smoke and fire. And Pinocchio and Geppetto and
Yeah, that's interesting too. Like, how much you can, there's something about depending on what people get their attention stuck on. There's a beauty to it, like in some way. I don't know what to say.
and the goldfish bowl are all on the raft, trying desperately to get out of the whale, which inhales and pulls them back and then sneezes and pushes them forward. And at some point, they actually break free. And there's a good gates of hell image there with the whale belching out smoke like mad and its jaws open. And so they're paddling madly away to get away from this whale.
They did
The whale
it!
is very angry, just as Geppetto suggested. And there's interesting sound effects that go along with this. The whale actually turns into a what happens when your phone is smarter than you are. The whale actually turns into something that's like a locomotive, and the sound effects become industrial. So it's this monstrous machine-like locomotive dragon that's bent on the destruction of Pinocchio.
What did he mean? Sorry, I'm. What do you mean by that's what happened when your phone is smarter than you? It rings.
Say it's an amalgam of natural and social forces completely unleashed.
Okay, well, sorry.
The whale actually turns into something that's like a locomotive, and the sound effects become industrial. So it's this monstrous machine-like locomotive dragon that's bent on the destruction of
Kill the
you
child.
could say it's an amalgam of natural and social forces completely unleashed. Everything's unleashed against Pinocchio and his father. And so
Society.
they're having a hell of a time. There's big waves, and they end up. The whale actually abandons them, but before it does that, it nails them with its tail and blows the raft into smithereens. And so then they're both in the water, and Geppetto and Pinocchio are drowning. And Geppetto actually goes down for the third time, so to speak. And as he's going down, he says to Pinocchio, "Save yourself, save yourself." And so that's kind of Pinocchio's last temptation, because Geppetto's had it, and he could just get to shore on his own, but he would have abandoned his father. And so that's the thing, and that's one of the issues that this movie grapples with, is what exactly is your responsibility? And you could say, well, it's to save yourself. But the myth that underlies this says, no, it's not. That's not exactly right. It's to rescue your father from the chaotic depths and integrate with that and to save both. And that's your duty to your culture. But more than that, it's also your duty to your soul. It isn't going to work if you just save yourself, because you're still going to be a jackass puppet, even though you're going to be back on shore. So anyways, Pinocchio grabs you.
It's yeah, sure, it's yourself, but at the same time, you're such a part of the other people too, that other people have what you need too. There's a thing there, I think. That's like also like kind of like there's something romantic about how you're stuck with the other people chaos in some way. It's fine if you get it, but at the same time, to find yourself, you need to find other people too, and somehow. I think. I don't know. That's kind of cool. That's a good moral.
Carries him to shore, and the whale shows back up and gives him one more good ball, and then we see everybody on shore, and it's peaceful again. Geppetto is on his back,
He's alive!
and the kitten washes up, and the goldfish bowl washes up, and the cricket washes up. He's been outside the whale all of this time, and we see the cricket calling for Pinocchio, and then we see him lying in a pool of water dead. So he's died. Rescuing his father, he died. Well, why? Well, he is a jackass puppet, and maybe he was supposed to die if he rescued his father, because that insufficiency that characterized him is something that's destroyed by the process of encountering the chaos, which was so difficult it reforms the personality. And the same occurs when he rescues his father and incorporates that. So it's like Bilbo in the first part of the, what is it called, the Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit. He's this sort of jackass puppet guy, a little overprotected Shire dweller at the beginning, and he goes on this tremendous adventure, and he has to develop the negative parts of his character. He actually has to become a professional thief, and he has to develop his bravery, and so the old personality in some sense has to die to give life to the new one. And so
okay, there was a link between
you see in
he's
the
dying.
Harry Potter series too, at the very end.
Why is Pinocchio died?
Resurrected.
Why does he did to the chaos? Why is death like something like determined? I don't understand that part.
And that actually happens to a slightly lesser degree in the second movie, where the resurrection is aided by the phoenix tears after he gets eaten by that, or he gets chomped by that big snake, which is roughly speaking the same thing that's happening here. Sorry about that. Okay, so anyways,
The
Pinocchio's dead.
smartphone.
That's not good.
The
So
smartphone.
the next scene, we see them back at home, and he's lying dead on the bed, and Geppetto and everyone else are mourning his loss. And then then we see this magic transformation, and we hear the blue fairy's voice. And so
He's a guy. He's a
he's pushed himself
boy.
to his limits, and a natural process kicks back in and revivifies him. But now he's no longer a jackass puppet. He's actually something that's real.
Can you lie
And so
now?
then he tells,
I forgot.
Somebody notices that now, he's undergone this proper transformation. He notices his hands in particular, and then he tells Geppetto, who refuses to even notice. He says, "No, Pinocchio, you're dead. Lie down." So Pinocchio convinces him that he's not dead, and then in celebration they start the clocks again, and so time kicks back in at that point, and so then they have a big celebration. Music happens again, because this is a celebratory moment, and they dance, and the harmony is restored. The good old guy has his son, and so the house is properly set up, and the old state has its vision and its capacity for transformation, and the thing that transforms has the stability of the culture behind it, and so perfect. And then the cricket goes outside, and he's talking to the star and the blue fairy, and he says he's pretty happy about how this has gone. And so then she gives him this little medal, which is made out of gold, and it's a sun, and it's a Mandela.
Official
And
consents.
so it's made out of gold, and gold is a noble metal. It doesn't mate indiscriminately with other metals. It doesn't tarnish, and so it's a metal that represents the sun. And then he flashes his little badge at the star, establishing a relationship between his function as the proper conscience and his orientation towards the highest good. And that's it there. So he's got this little sun. He's wearing this little sun. So he's also transformed and developed as a consequence of this entire process. And now Pinocchio's conscience is properly oriented. It's oriented towards the highest value. And then the movie closes.
Bitches.
And that's Pinocchio.
You think Pinocchio is going to become an incel? His Irish goal is
So,
becoming.
I'll give you a minute and I'll take some questions. And try to figure out how to shut my phone up.
Break it! Take it! Hammer Scott! Break it!
Yes.
You seem to use the vaguely psychoanalytic approach to kind of extracting the inarticulated messages from the mythology and stories and religion developed over time. So could you almost say that those are kind of constructing this to a societal level, out of an individual level? These are kind of the dreams of the collective unconscious?
Sure.
These are
That's exactly what they are. They're the fantasies of the collective unconscious. That's one way of looking at it. I mean, they also take a socially determined form, right? Because it's animated, and that's a technology, and it's obviously something that exists in a particular time and place. But yeah, it's a collective attempt to give voice to the oldest of behavioral patterns. And so here's one way of thinking about that, which we'll talk about in some detail, which you should have read about, at least to some degree already. The question is, where is that knowledge represented? And Jung would say, well, it's part of the collective unconscious, and it's got a biological origin. But his description of the biological nature of the collective unconscious is quite ambiguous. And I think that that's because it actually is ambiguous. Like, for example, we know that primates, and humans in particular, are at least biologically predisposed to be afraid of snakes. So we can learn that very easily. Now, you could make a case that it's more than biological predisposition, that it's actually built in, but I would say the predisposition idea is actually a better one, because you at least need the exposure to the snake to get it going. So that would take place as a consequence of your experience. So it's not purely biological, although it is the case that...
No, there's probably like a thing about like, oh, you have like a structure that's like already there, and then with your socialization, you create another structures that's really specific to the culture and the time and place you're into. And that's why it says it's ambiguous. I think it's like there's kind of like two layers, right? There's one layer that's like really primordial, that's like a sharing ground, but like on top of that, there's like a certain structure that's like really specific to your family, your time, your space, your society, you know?
Hence, as you
And maybe there's like something about like neuroscience here. It's like how neurons are made. I don't know.
get older, which is not necessarily what you would expect.
You know, it's like the habitus.
And I just read a paper this week localizing snake fear in primates, and it was hypothalamic. It's really old. So because the hypothalamus is a very, very old part of the brain. It's older than the amygdala, and amygdala is...
Especially with the frontal thing, it's more plastic. I don't know how plasticity works. Never mind. I don't know. Is there like parts of the brain that are more plastic than others? I would assume that the frontal lobe, because of like the function, it takes more plastic, but like I don't know.
Snake fear as well. It's really, really old. So you could say, well, you're prepared to develop snake fear, like you're prepared to develop language, and like you're prepared to walk by your biological structure. Now, whether that actually constitutes the contents of your memory, which is what Jung seems to imply, is an open question. But it doesn't really matter, because... So, one time when I went to visit my nephew, he was running around in a night suit. He was only about 4 or 5. So he's acting out this mythological pattern, roughly speaking. And you'd say, well, how did he know how to do that? And the answer would be, well, it was represented all around him in the culture. In fragments. And like, kids are pretty good at putting fragments of stories together. That's really what understanding is to put fragments into story form. And so he'd watch Disney movies, and his parents had read him stories, and he did pretend play with the other kids, and all of those were like exemplars of this underlying narrative. They're variants of it, and because he can abstract and generalize, he's pulling out the central features of those narratives, the heroic features, and then embodying them. So you could say, well, the central features of these narratives are fragmented and distributed across the entire culture. And so they don't have to be exactly inside your head. They don't have to be part of your memory. They're distributed in the behavior.
Yeah, and that's how you get socialized. You know, like, I go back to like, there's probably like a certain part of your psyche that's like kind of like fundamental of like your biology, but like just because of the other part that's more plastic, that makes you more prone to be like a member of a time in a place, you know. And like the thing with like Knight, I'm pretty sure like it's just because like it's all around him, so it's like he had the proper structure around him to make him understand that concept and make it play. You know,
and
the culture, like
entire culture, and you can put them together out of that. So, and people do that. That's why they're so hungry for stories like, well, like this one, or like Star Wars, or like Star Trek, or like the Marvel movies, or like
League of Legends.
Yeah, what you said about the last scene, you saw it over and over again. I would rather do the same thing with the last scene.
League of Legends.
You guys keep it- Watch that probably 20 or 30 times.
Yeah, it's really interesting watching little kids interact with it, because movies are unbelievably complex. I mean, you know, by the time you're your age and you've seen, you know, several hundred of them at minimum, the impact wears off. But it's really something sitting down with a 4-year-old who hasn't watched very many movies and walking through one with them. I mean, they're so turned on. It's just, I took my daughter when she was too young. Actually, I took her to see The Mask that Jim Carrey made.
It's not even that good.
She survived it. I don't think I traumatized her. But
No,
she
it's
was
a-
in my lap, and it was really like gripping a bundle of barbed wire. She was just like that the entire movie, you know. And halfway through, I thought, well, that's probably a little too much psychophysiological intensity for one small body. You know, those movies, they just have a massive impact on little kids, and they will do exactly that. They'll watch it over and over and over, and you think, what are they doing exactly? Well, they're trying to understand. They're gripped by it somehow, right? And it's like
I like Peter Pan. Peter Pan was fucking sick. I played it in kindergarten. I watched it so bad. Yeah, Peter Pan.
they're deeply curious. They know there's something in it, and they're trying to extract out what it is, and they'll repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. So they're hungry for the information, because it's part of rescuing their father from the chaos. That's one way of thinking about it. So
do like all. I don't know. That's a stretch to say like all kids. All information gathering from kids is from saving their father. I think I feel that ideal is not something built into us. Okay, it's something that you kind of search for or find. I don't think the kids are like know that. I don't think a kid like as like inherently like know it needs to save his father. I don't know. I don't know what psychoanalyst guys said. Whatever. It's interesting. It's interesting. You know, it's cool.
well, good enough then. Let's call it a day.
Okay. Goodbye.
There's one more question.
So,
Oh.
in Maps of Meaning, there's the idea that you keep returning to about, like, when you first encounter the unknown, it's like, it's first fearful.
Yep.
And then Jung has the idea of archetypes. So, are there other kinds of meanings that people will find in new information that's already patterned into them?
It's patterned into them or into the new information?
That patterned into them?
Wait, I wasn't paying attention.
What? There is one more question.
So, in Maps of Meaning, there's the idea that you keep returning to about, like, when you first encounter the unknown, it's like, it's first fearful.
Yep.
And then Jung has the idea of archetypes. So, are there other kinds of meaning that people will find in new information that's already patterned into them? Kinds of,
Are there other kinds of meaning that people will find in new information that's already patterned into them? Oh, okay. So like, what's the biology, whatever? Like, how much you can project what's inside of you, inside the patterns you're looking for?
find in new information that's already patterned into them?
It's patterned into them or into the new information?
That's patterned into them, like by the archetype. Do people actually?
Sure. Well, they project the contents of their fantasy onto the unknown
Yeah,
thing.
the unconscious. How much like the unconscious is there?
A process of self
First.
You know, so for example, let's say that you're gripped by love at first sight or something like that. Now, you don't know
Aw.
anything about the person that you're tremendously attracted to, but you'll have fantasies about them. And that in fact, your image of them is a fantasy. And if you take that fantasy apart, you'll find out what you value. So you're projecting yourself into the world, and you can discover, I mean, you may also discover something about them, because there may be elements of them that match the ideal quite nicely if you're fortunate, and if your ideal is, you know, of a reasonable sort. But you definitely encounter yourself when you look at the unknown, because you use your fantasy to structure the contact. You know, and the fundamental structuring is the heroic encounter with the unknown, because that's the pathway, that's the fundamental pathway of human beings, because we're information foragers, fundamentally.
Huh.
It's that automatic response to the fantasies as well that are part of the first.
Okay, sure. Well, that's also, yes, absolutely. That's exactly right. Yes. So, I mean, you imagine this. Imagine that you're attracted to someone and you're too terrified to go speak to her. Well, what's happening? Well, you have a fantasy of a judge. And that's your imagined representation of your own insufficiency in relationship to the ideal. And you project that on this person as a judge, and then you're too paralyzed to even open your mouth around her. Very common experience.
Wait, you what?
Okay.
You project your insecurities into them? I think?
Your imagined representation of your own insufficiency in relationship to the ideal.
Oh, your insufficiencies. Okay, I see. Well, that was cool.